day, America, and welcome. Hey, it's great to be back, and we have a special guy here, Dennis. Is it Dennis or Mitch? I guess it's Dennis Maley. I know they know you as Mitch. Is that correct?
Correct.
This guy, amazing. Bradenton Times, does everything. Writer, author, writes books, writes for the Bradenton Times, runs the Bradenton Times, I believe. Former captain in the military, in the Army, a boxer. Good-looking guy, too, I think. I don't know. I could be wrong, but it's great for you to be here for me.
I appreciate you having me today.
Thank you, brother. And listen, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I got into journalism while I was in college, and I was on a boxing team. And if you think back to the days of internet chat rooms and stuff, bulletin boards. So I was in a computer lab typing on one, and a guy approached me and said, "Hey, I'm an editor for Boxing World magazine, and I'm curating the induction guide for the Boxing Hall of Fame, Boxing Hall of Fame." And he said, "I really like this one thread you had. Would you write an article for that, and I'll pay you, and we'll put it in the guide?" And it was kind of about the politics and the business of boxing.
That must be fascinating.
Very much. And so I said, "Yeah, that'd be great." And he's going to pay me for it, writing words, So I did that, and then he said it was a big hit, and would you like to write regularly for Boxing World? So I started doing that in college. When I got out of college, I went into the military. I was in the Army World Class Athlete Program, which is an actual unit where if you're ranked in the top 10 of an Olympic sport by the sanctioning body, they'll send you to the Olympic Training Center, and that's your job, is to train and represent the Army in the sport, which is
so you represented the country in boxing.
Yeah. And so I went through all that, and I was still writing for the Post newspaper, a little bit of PR stuff for the Pentagon that they had me doing, and then I turned professional after my amateur career ended, and then I had a career injury, shoulder injury, and I wanted to go back to writing. And it was kind of hard. I was married, then I got divorced. I had a young child, so I was a single parent now, and I was doing a lot of freelance work, and then it was really difficult because everybody wanted me to be a sports journalist.
Well, I'm curious why just journalism versus in the boxing profession? There's money to be made there, I'm sure.
I did. That landscape has changed so much. I actually did do some broadcasting first, and I was doing it for Comcast Sports, and I got to audition for HBO. And HBO almost never has a job come up. They don't even do boxing anymore, but they were the biggest game in town. And I was, I think, about 27 at that point, and it came down to me and another guy. I didn't get the position. And then at that point, it was kind of like, well, there's not going to be steady work in this. And I'm not a real big sports fan, to be honest.
Really? If it's not about you, you're not going to cover it.
I'm not even going to watch it. You know what I mean? I played football in college. I boxed. I'll watch a boxing match a year, maybe. I don't watch football at all. It doesn't really interest me if I'm not playing it. And I've always been, I have a degree in political science and economics. I've always been into world events.
What was your major?
Political science and economics.
Okay, that explains that. So that's why these articles, I know you did one on the Houthis, and I see your books are back here. Tell me real quick about those books. I know we got to get into a lot of other things, but...
Sure. I started with my debut novel, Long Road Home. The two I'm really most proud of is Sacred Hearts, which is a story about PTSD. It's about a soldier kind of getting his life together after that. And it was kind of an accidental soldier, meaning it was a teacher who was in the National Guard and ended up in Iraq and Afghanistan, more than he signed up for, so to speak. And then Burn Black, Wallstreet Burn came out in 2021 on the 100th anniversary of the horrible events in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Just terrible. Most people aren't even aware of it.
Very true.
It's amazing. And we'll get to that later because I really want to dive into that. That's fascinating. Thank you very much for being here. I joke a lot, but really, truly is an honor to have you.
I appreciate it. I'm excited about what you're doing here.
Well, we're going to try. This is a great country, and people take this country for granted. It gives us a lot of freedoms and a lot of things. It's a lot of craziness too, but overall, it's one of the best places in the world, I think, anyway. I'm sure you agree. All right, let's talk about, let's get into it. Welcome to CJ Knows, and let's talk about what's going on in Iowa. Tell me a little bit your opinions of what we saw in Iowa and these presidential...
I think you saw very clearly that absent legal intervention, Donald Trump is going to be the Republican nominee. I mean, I did not expect him to go over 50%. And I think the big takeaway from the outcome was how much people don't realize how much the campaigns of Haley and DeSantis bet pretty much everything
on Iowa.
On at least, I don't know if they realistically thought they can get an upset, but I think they thought they could overperform expectations.
But we had a hearing 110,000 people show up in the caucus, and it's they're not voting, they're getting together. And Iowa, have you been to Iowa?
Yes.
It's a lot of corn.
Well,
And,
it might
you know what
not
I
be
mean?
representative of the country, but it might not be unrepresentative of the Republican Party.
well, that's I think a great topic. I mean, who's left? I was a Republican years ago. I even ran as one. I couldn't stay in the Republican Party. I like to say it left me, and you're hearing a lot of former Republicans who have left the party. They can't. You know, I'm fiscal conservative, but I'm not what they are. I mean, this is almost fascism.
I think both parties are pushing people out as much as they can.
Well, this is why I love Andrew Yang and what he's doing with the Forward Party. I've been fascinated. I gave some money towards that. Well, you know, I should introduce Henry Raines. Henry is here with us as he is every week. Henry, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. It's good to see Dennis here.
I know you know Dennis.
Yeah,
He's
we go
Mitch.
way back.
He's Mitch today. You know why he's Mitch?
I can't get out of the habit of Dennis.
Well, listen, I was Chris, and back in high school, I changed to CJ so I could, you know, date some women.
Yeah, I couldn't call you Chris after calling you CJ
He was Dennis.
so long.
Now he's Mitch because it's cooler. I think it's cool.
But
anyway.
for the viewers or the listeners, because we're on audio too, we're on all the podcast platforms, video platforms. But Donald Trump, 51% of the vote in the Iowa caucus. Only 15% of Republicans were voting, eligible Republicans were voting in the caucuses. They had very severe weather, but the turnout was still about 40% lower than it was in 2016 when Donald Trump ran for the first time. Ron DeSantis came in second, which was a big relief for him, but it's a weak second at 21.2%. Nikki Haley, who was hoping to get in the second place and throw Ron out of the race after this, is at 19.1%, and then everybody else was follow on. Vivek Ramaswamy left.
What do you think of Christie bowing out, and does that affect anything here?
Nothing at all.
You don't think so?
He was a non-issue from the start. The only real story here is that Haley and DeSantis both bet big on outperforming expectations, and they spent a lot of their campaign war chest on trying to do that, and they both failed. And that means that their plan that they were going to get a jump from donors saying, oh, wow, look, if one of them would have outperformed the other by 10 points, if somebody would have got up to maybe 30, then maybe we would have something to talk about. Maybe a donor would get excited about saying there's a Trump alternative. But I think the takeaway here is there's not a Trump alternative. And I don't see any way that either one of them outperform in New Hampshire either, because they don't have the money left and they're not creating excitement.
But the folks that are voting or participating in the caucus, let's say that, and who will be voting in New Hampshire and South Carolina, are they just a small percentage of the Republican Party? I mean, the numbers, Henry, you're bringing out that showed up at this caucus are minuscule. So he can,
I'm not going to argue. 50%. I'm not going to argue the fact
you think
that
this goes across
not only small,
over?
extremely white.
Yes, listen, I'm not going to argue that the primary system is a flawed way to evaluate candidates. I think, and I've been arguing for years, we should have a national primary.
Yes.
Imagine if we contested the national election as a rolling election from state to state. That would it'd be nonsensical, right? And part of the reason we do it this way, CJ, is so that the parties can exercise more control. They don't want to have. If they would have had a one day, Ron Paul might have been a candidate. Bernie definitely would have been a candidate. They're able to manipulate, or let's say shape the outcome when it's rolling that way. And yes, the media helps as well, the mainstream corporate media, by saying, hey, you didn't do well in Iowa, it's all over. That starts to shape people's perception about...
Why would DeSantis and Haley even think about making their play in Iowa? Is it their appeal is to white America, rural America?
No, because their campaigns were floundering so much that absent of a surprise in Iowa, their donors... Haley has a little bit more Wall Street money, Koch network money. DeSantis has been cutting staff, cutting expenses, because he brought in most of his money very early. And then it became very clear he's not gaining traction with voters.
But it would seem like, why would Christie be in Iowa? He should have been in New Hampshire and other states where there are people that think, not just react.
Well, none of the polling is showing, though, that Trump is vulnerable in any of these early states.
Well, I don't know about pollings. They were wrong with in 2016.
I would say there were not. The polling...
Really?
Yes. The vast majority of polling that people look at when they say that, it still fell within the margin of error. So it was So Clinton's winning by 2 points, and there's a 3-point margin of error, and she loses by 1. That's expected.
Okay, fair enough.
It was
fair
tighter.
Enough. Fair enough. Henry, what do we got?
Well, we're wrapping up on Iowa, and we're going to take a trip around the world next.
Awesome. Okay, let's do it. A world in flames. Let's take a trip around the world. I love, political science and more international relations. Let's talk about some of the hot spots and the things happening. I know you just wrote an article about the Houthis and what's going on over there. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, that was the most common question I've been getting this week from people in my periphery is, hey, what's going on over here? Why are they attacking ships? And really what you have, it gets a little bit convoluted because they call them Houthi rebels, but they are the de facto ruling party.
Of Yemen, right?
Of Yemen, yes. Mm-hmm. And Yemen has been embroiled in the civil war for more than a decade. And this is very important. We have been backing the Saudis, selling weapons and helping them prosecute war against the Houthis in favor of what is considered the elected legitimate government that hasn't been in power for a long time, while the Shias in Iran have been backing the Houthis. So it's really a proxy war.
Okay, let's talk about this a little bit because, the basic guy says, okay, they're all Islam guys, all Islamic, but there's the Sunnis, the Shiites, the Kurds. Honest to God, I spoke to Biden about this once back in 2007, and we were talking about Iraq and how do you divide, and he was against the policy. He thought that you should give each group their sovereign area. And I was always confused or asking, if they're all believing the same God, doing the same thing, why is this power dynamic and struggle between the Shiites and the Sunni? And we had Saddam that was involved as our buffer, if you will, with the CIA for years against the Shiites. What's going on with that? And can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, and one of the reasons Saddam was our buffer was because he was very secular. He was not a devout Muslim in any way and really didn't want to have a theocratic state in any way either. The Hussein family really liked a lot of activities that were not necessarily pious, right?
Yeah.
So Saddam was always great at keeping that radical element in check. Now, when you look at Shias, that's only about 10% of the world's Muslim population. So it's
including Iran,
including Iran.
Okay.
So Iran is the only majority Shia country in the world, and they are by far the let's say the collective voice and let's say police force of Shia.
Do you know, and I'm not sure, what's the difference between the two?
Yes, this goes all the way back to the origins of Islam and who the successor of Muhammad would be.
Okay.
So it was nephew and a son and the wife, and there were all these different battles onto who the successor of Muhammad would be. And for the most part, the Sunnis prevailed, and that's why they're close to 90% of the Muslim population. But a lot of what happens, and the Kurds really aren't as much division. They're mostly protective of their own territories and kind of want to be left alone. It's an oversimplification, but the vast majority of conflict is between Shia and Sunnis, and that goes back to the origins of Islam. And I mean, you could kind of read your Irish-English history and look at how the Christian church between Catholics and Protestants.
And that fight.
Yes,
They believe the same religion, but they're different.
Yes.
They used to kill each other.
We've got a map up there that, besides everything that Dennis just said, there's a financial component now to it that makes it even bigger and more important between the struggle. Now, if you look to CJ's shoulder, you see the Persian Gulf there, right next to Iran and on Saudi Arabia. In a moment, we'll be talking about the Red Sea, which is the article that Dennis had. But the Shiites surround the Persian Gulf there. Iran is the majority state, but there is almost a majority in Iraq, I believe, a plurality, definitely. And then the eastern part of Saudi Arabia, where all the oil is dominated by Shiite workers who are basically in an apartheid situation with the Sunnis that control the country.
They're treated like apartheid back in the day?
Right.
Is that
So
what you're saying? Okay.
if you're in Iran and you look at your Shiite brothers right across the Persian Gulf, you can be thinking, we could control well over the Middle East oil, well over half the Middle East oil. If they would just revolt against those Sunni oppressors in the kingdom, we'd be right here to help them out.
If you go way back historically, not that far back, when the West controlled all of this, I always thought that they created like Iraq, and they put the Sunnis, the Shiites, everybody together, then pick one side to step on the rest. They did that, I thought, in Nigeria.
Correct.
The British did
Congo.
that so they could get the oil, and then it leaves us this quagmire problem later on. I don't know if you agree with any of those ideas.
I think that was an asinine idea back then to think that that was ever going to create a stable state.
Right.
But the important part, I think, for Americans to understand is that we made the decision a long time ago, and I'm not sure it was a good decision, in that we backed Saudi Arabia and at the expense of our relationship with Iran. And the real reality of that is when you look at Saudi Arabia.
Do you think that's because of the revolution and Black Friday and all that?
No, I think it was just oil.
Okay.
I think we just looked at them as having more oil reserves. And here's another thing, too. There's little evidence, and this we can kind of use our stated reason for being in Ukraine is that, this is about an attack on Western democracy and our way of life. Right. The truth is, we tend to back strongmen. That's why we like...
Yeah, Somoza, Nicaragua, Marcos in the Philippines,
and including overthrowing the democratically elected president of Iran for the Shah that we installed.
Right.
We want a strong man who will listen to us and keep everybody in line.
Not many people understand this.
No.
You're very unique because I hate to say it, but most people aren't aware that, and sort of like, we'll talk about Ukraine in a second, but let's continue with the Houthi situation and them attacking shipping, and then we'll get to Ukraine.
So the Red Sea is an enormously important shipping lane because it provides access to the Suez Canal for a lot of different, particularly energy sources. Because again, we're in the oil part of the world, right? So by cutting that off, or just making it hot in there, right? You're going to have oil companies and all kinds of shippers, but particularly energy related, saying, I don't know if we need to put any shipments out there if there's a chance it's going to get blown up.
So we have to defend it.
No, but here's part of the problem. So what we have right now is we've had these Houthi attacks, and they've stated very clearly, we are doing this until there's a ceasefire in Gaza. And we are doing it to anybody related to Israel or helping Israel. They took a Japanese ship prisoner. On Monday, they attacked their first U.S. flagship, let's say, right?
Minor damage.
And they fired on a carrier.
Right.
So another part that's really wild about the technology that's available today is that relatively inexpensive. CJ, these are $25,000 drone missiles that they're putting onto it. We're shooting them down with $1 million a round and air defense missiles. $1 million of ours
25
against 25,000.
Well, isn't Ukraine taught us something about war has changed completely?
Yes.
I mean, my God, this is the world is upside down.
And they don't have to win, the Houthis. No. All they have to do is disrupt enough to make it painful.
I remember not being in favor of Saudi Arabia screwing the Houthis back in the day. I thought, this is a mismatch.
Yes.
Now I'm thinking, shit, I should have put more money on Saudi Arabia.
I don't know that that's true, though, too, because you had... and Saudi Arabia was indiscriminately bombing. It was a lot of women and children right across the border.
War is that way.
Yes, and this is one of those things that
there's no clean wars, are there?
We have to think though that every time we provide the armament for these conflicts, the other side, it might be on no American's mind that back then we were providing Saudi Arabia with the weaponry that they were launching attacks on Yemen, but everybody in Yemen remembers that. Everybody in Gaza remembers that we're supplying Israel.
Yeah, but this is like this half-assed war. I remember talking to General Ross and a four-star general, Southern Command, in Panama back in the day about Vietnam, and he was a general. He goes, you can't bring politics into these decisions. If you're going to go in and take care of business, or don't go in.
You couldn't do that against the Houthis right now, because if you make that zone hotter, you can't get oil during a war. That's a problem.
And if you look at the map behind you, it's much more than oil. Although the red line would show how the oil comes through this Middle East, through the Red Sea, as you were talking about the Bab al-Mandab Strait, and goes underneath India. And the map doesn't go far enough, but that's the Strait of Malacca, and that's where most of the trade that goes to China is. So all the oil there. But you have to think about the reverse, too. Think about all the supply chain disruptions that we have. Right. All the manufactured goods.
Why isn't China involved in this, then? Why aren't they all involved
Well, all the manufactured goods in China come back that same route to get to Europe. But now you're talking about taking them all the way, all the cars or all the TVs or whatever they're importing.
Where's China?
All
Where's the rest of them?
That's a great question.
They're going to lose out. Where are these people?
This is going to hurt. And listen, it's going to hurt the global economy. If you say we have a tenuous, mostly recovery from the COVID-related supply chain.
Are you good with Biden handling international relations right now with these kind of hot spots, what's happening in Israel, Hamas, et cetera? Or you think he's doing an okay job, the administration?
Do I think?
They're doing
No, I don't think they're doing a good job at all.
I would love, what would you do differently? Now you've reported on it. You're the guy you're the king. What do you do?
I would, first of all, demand a ceasefire in Gaza. And I would withdraw U.S. support for any continued military action by Israel.
Henry, are we going to Gaza before Ukraine, or are we coming after? Because this is interesting.
Well, before we leave this map, let me just point out one more thing about where those shipping lanes go. None of them have anything to do with going to the Pacific coast of the United States or the Atlantic coast. So everybody else is suffering in that hemisphere of the world. Our supply chains are still looking pretty good. And if you're just going to play the game of imperialism, maybe it's not so bad if the other stronger powers are.
On the oil part, you'd have to consider the idea that oil is sold on a global market. So if
I would think Saudi Arabia doesn't even mind the prices going up.
No, they don't. They don't at all. Saudi Arabia is in a very, very, very different mode than we are. Saudi Arabia, if you're sitting on a lot of oil, but you know it's finite, right? If you're sitting on it and you're not diversifying your economy because your citizenry is mostly a lot of religious zealots and fundamentalists. In fact, you get free education in up to a PhD in Saudi Arabia if you're a citizen.
Right.
Do you know what the number one PhD that they get is?
No.
A doctorate in wasabi, which is the most extreme fundamental version
religion. Matter of fact, they've been accused of, look at the 9/11 people. 13 of the hijackers were Saudi.
Yeah.
They're not Iraq.
So you have this country that's saying, we don't have anything. Now they're trying to get into sports and trying to do some different things.
Buy into golf, et cetera. Right?
But the reality is they haven't diversified their economy. What they want to do is sell less oil for more money. That's their game. Where in the United States, the way our economy works as a consumer-driven economy, we want to just drill and extract as much as we can at whatever cost to keep everything running smooth today. We're not thinking about the future either. We might have a diversified economy, but we're not taking energy policy as if it was anything other than endless,
maybe it's because we don't have that monarchy and we don't have a long-range plan.
Correct.
We change governments so often.
So everybody wants something for the next campaign cycle, right?
They don't worry about long-term.
Correct.
It's like when we build a road, I-4 or 75, they don't build it for 20 years from now.
Nope.
They build it for right now, and by the time it's built, it's too small.
It's already,
because they don't want the budget. Maybe we'll talk more about that. Okay, so let's talk about Israel. I was on a flight with some guys that spent a lot of time in Israel when this all happened about, I guess it was October 7th, when the Hamas went in there and did some. I saw the videos. I saw things that, any decent human, there's no human being claiming it's an Allah or God can do that. When I watched that, I said, I have no mercy for these. All of Hamas has to be eliminated. And the terrible thing, and this Israeli was saying, if you're a Palestinian, what they've been saying is just multiply, have more kids, and that'll take care of it, and just have more Palestinians everywhere.
That's kind of an ethos.
Yeah,
of
but
Islam
that's what he's claiming that's happening. There's just so many people.
You also have to remember that Israel
raised.
never wanted a two-state solution, particularly the ruling party.
These guys today, for sure.
Netanyahu,
no way.
In fact, he's on record. I think it's 2019. Henry, we spoke about this before, where he said, what we need to do is prop up Hamas. That will ensure that between them and the Palestinian Authority, we'll never have a unified government.
So you think Hamas exists in part because of Israel's willingness to have them to
For sure. They wanted to keep it that way, and I think that they also knew that this is eventually going to happen. There's some parallels.
How do you stop the war? You said a comment, we got to stop when Hamas is using hospitals. The people are 100%, supposedly most of them support Hamas. They voted for them. That's what I'm asking
free
you.
And fair election.
Well, he didn't vote for Netanyahu. That's for sure.
That's for sure as well.
So let's just take a look at this map for a second. So Gaza Strip right down there. It's hard for people here in the U.S. to understand the size of it, and maybe as I describe it, hard for people outside of Tampa Bay. But the only thing I can compare it to, if you look at a map of Florida and you see that finger that sticks down into Tampa Bay, that's Pinellas County. That's St. Petersburg, Clearwater. People take trips here. They sort of know where it is, like they know where Disney World is. Well, that is half the size of Pinellas County. So, and you've got small. 2 million people stuck in that half of a county. And then
80% of the houses are gone.
And Israel was told half of them to evacuate. So that's like telling everybody in the top half from Clearwater down, move down into South St. Petersburg, walking. On the other side, and that's controlled by Hamas. On the other side, you see the West Bank. That's what supposedly the other part of the two-state solution was. Israel was going to be Israel, and the West Bank was going to be adjusted to be a Palestinian state. Now, the orange are what the Palestinians, the Palestinian Authority actually controls. The blue is what Jewish settlers control, or the Israeli government controls, and the color in between is some of each. So tell me, looking at that, how the orange part is ever going to have a country in that. Well, I guess that's probably about the size of
They're not going to
Delaware.
have a country, and a lot of Israelis I spoke to said they just got to leave. It's too bad. They're saying, I've been told, their own people don't want them.
And this is true.
They don't want them.
There's
they won't take them.
Nobody
wants Palestinians.
Yeah.
None of the. So it's their problem. Why is it our problem? And I don't understand land things. I mean, I do, but this is my land. I've been.
That's what I said. Listen, if you go back to the creation of the whole Zionist movement, I think this was always going to be the way it turned out. You were never going to reclaim old land and populate it and say that this new state is now here.
Are we going to give our land to the natives?
Correct.
Not happening.
Right. So the idea that this was ever going to turn out, I've thought about this problem, CJ, at length. I've read so many different books about it, and I always still come away with, I don't think there's a good answer. I think that's what's happening now is
land for peace. Land for
And
peace.
we're not going to solve it on this segment because we're going to have Dennis back at his convenience.
No, I want to
take up
Dennis.
where we left off.
Mitch. We need Mitch back.
Right.
You can have Dennis. I want Mitch. That is amazing.
That's going to be complicated. And
I meant for the show. Hey,
but
come on.
We're coming back with my Dennis and your Mitch to talk about Burn Black Wall Street Burn, and we've got some photos there that'll make you think twice too.
Burn, baby, burn. Tulsa, independent of your book, independent of meeting you, not long ago there were a big thing on it about it. Most people in the United States don't understand what happened in I think it was 1921, if I recall, when this whole section of Tulsa, African-American section, was destroyed. The big riots.
Not only destroyed, CJ, it's the only place in the continental United States that's ever been bombed by airplanes.
Okay, talk to me about that, because I knew about the destruction. I knew about, they claim, I've read how it all got started, but there's some, I think, different variations.
So a few interesting things I learned in my research. One, I'm almost embarrassed to say this, I didn't realize that Oklahoma didn't get statehood until 1907. Very late. There's a good reason why they got statehood, which was in 1905, the largest oil discovery in the United States ever was in Tulsa, the Ida Glenfield, which is very comparable. In Saudi Arabia, all of their oil is basically, all the reserves are in 4 giant, what they call elephant fields. And this was as big as one of those Saudi Arabians. Right? Amazing. Yes. And the interesting part about it, and why they're not an oil power today, is that it was so broad and shallow. And because it was so shallow, there's less rocks in it, less shale in it. So it's almost quality. Yes, it's almost ready to be used. The refinery process is so minimal at it. So they were able to drain it all out in decades. But 1905, they find this. Prior to this, you have a lot of Indians, many who were pushed along the Trail of Tears, and you have a lot of freed black slaves, former Indian black slaves, all living in this kind of hard scrabble land.
But has value because of the oil.
Yeah.
Isn't there a new movie out, Flower or something? That's a little. Isn't that about it in a way?
Very similar. Very similar.
Okay.
That happened about 10 years later, very close in Osage County. But there was a unique aspect to that story as well. So what you had was this discovery. All of a sudden, this land that nobody wanted, that they were all living happily on because you couldn't farm it very well, the soil was too rocky.
Nobody wanted it.
No. And they were like, just leave us alone here, we'll be fine, right? A bunch of people that were persecuted everywhere else. Then they find the oil, and then the money people come in and say, oh no, we're going to take over now. So all of a sudden, the city of Tulsa, in 10 years, goes from 10,000 people to 100,000 people.
Venezuela, baby.
Yes, massive growth. And World War I starts, and now there's a huge demand for oil. So you can't even compare it to San Francisco and New York City. You'd have to compare it to Dubai.
Who would think Tulsa,
right?
Oklahoma
Was Dubai 100 years ago, right? You had more millionaires there than anywhere else. You had 2 black millionaires only because it was also the most segregated place in the country. It was the only place that even the telephone booths were segregated. And you couldn't live unless you were in servants' quarters of a white person's house. You couldn't live, and you couldn't shop unless you had a card saying you were shopping for your white family's groceries, right? If you were a house servant. But the beauty of it was some industrious, educated, first-generation, free-born blacks, law degrees, PhDs, came down and started saying, hey, there's a vacuum here. There's money. They're only getting the crumbs off the table, but these are giant crumbs. In fact, one of the biggest problems in Greenwood as it got established was that they were having a hard time keeping kids in high school because you could make more as a shine boy in Tulsa than you could as a lawyer in Greenwood, even though lawyers did pretty good.
Now, Greenwood was a section of Tulsa?
A section, yeah, the Black Quarter, if you want to call it. And it was right off First Street, which was like the Vice Street. And then there's this city of, started out as just Clapboard Rentals, and then it grew to the point where they had a hotel there, the Stratford, that was on par with anything you'd find.
For blacks only?
Yes, blacks only. Anything you'd find in Paris or New York City at the time. They had 2 theaters, 700 people at Dreamland Theater. They had people were driving around with Stutz Bearcats. And again, this is only from crumbs off the table, right? But here's where everything started to get real tight was the armistice comes, the war ends, and now there's just a little bit of glut of oil, right? So it just contracts. They're still making money, but you know what it's like. It just contracts a little bit. Everybody gets nervous. Nobody's hiring and spending. Now you have a bunch of white World War I vets returning, thinking, because imagine this. Imagine you leave Tulsa as a city of 10,000 and you come back and it's Dubai. And you're hearing this in the letters. You're like, wait, what? There's oil there? What? They come back and it's like, hey, we're ready. No, we don't have any jobs in the fields right now. Oil's tight. And they're upset. And then they're looking and saying, there's...
And they didn't get, the vets back then, my dad's a World War I vet. I mean, he came back all screwed up from France, and they didn't really PTSD, none of that.
No, they got one check on the way out.
Yeah, and it was not like, I can imagine they're coming home like that after serving and in real brutal war. Yes. Some of them, anyway.
The most brutal.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Most of those units from Oklahoma came from France fighting the Germans.
Oh, yeah. My grandfather was there. I mean, he came back touched. And he mental institution kind of stuff.
So you have that going on in a city that had the largest chapter of a Klan in the country.
Really?
Yes. Now you also have a whole bunch of blacks that come back from Tulsa who served with the Buffalo Soldiers, who was the first black infantry unit ever for the United States.
So there's some kick-ass fighters there, too, on the other side.
And they're also thinking, CJ, I fought for everybody over there.
So I should do so.
We won. I'm going to come home, wear my uniform, and walk in the front door.
Yeah, because I was surprised to learn how many whites got killed as well. It wasn't just African Americans. It was, where more blacks got killed, but there was enough whites that got killed. So somebody put some resistance up, I imagine.
Oh, for sure. For sure. So you had, and that was led by those black soldiers. So the incident that it all goes off on is there's an Emmett Till type situation where, to this day, the reality of it's lost.
Is this where the kid is accused of...
In the elevator, yeah.
Of some girl?
Right. And the best story, and none of it holds up. The girl recanted her statement, said she was pressured into making it. The best story was that, the most likely story, I should say, is that everybody knew there was a hitch in the elevator when it stopped, and the shine boy that's at the heart of this, can only use a bathroom that the white guy that owned the shine stand had negotiated with a department store that they could use like their third store bathroom for his guys. And it was a female elevator operator because so many men were in war, females were doing traditionally male jobs. And when it stopped, he kind of lurched into her. The door opened and a clerk from the department store that was in accounting said, unhand her, call the police, he's attacking her. And this kid just runs. And he gets arrested. They have him in the jail. They have him in the jail. The Klan attempts to come and hang him and lynch him.
Yeah.
Black soldiers show up and say, And then there's a white sheriff. There's a completely corrupt city police department. The
white sheriff was cool, wasn't he?
Yes. So you have the one white sheriff with 4 deputies, and then you have the whole city police department, right? It's not like the South.
Trying to keep them.
Yeah. And the police department was riddled with Klansmen. So they were no help. And a lot of them were actually witnessed and there are accounts of policemen. In fact, there was one motorcycle cop that there was an eyewitness account of him dragging a black person during the battle, if you want to call it that. It was really a massacre, on his motorcycle tied to a rope. So the city police were no help. But this sheriff held it down and said, this kid will not be lynched. And he ended up sneaking him out in the middle of the night, getting a deputy.
So he survived?
Yes, he did. The kid survived. Dick Rowland is his name. His grandmother said that he came back years later, saw her once, and then she used to get letters, and then she found out he died working on loading docks in Seattle many years later, somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. And But what happened in the meantime was the soldiers leaving the courthouse and the protesters / Klans members that were wanting to lynch got into a little altercation.
And that began the
Shots
whole
were
thing.
fired, and then some white people were shot there, and then they opened the armory. They took all the weapons. They went over, and we're talking summary executions.
Talk to me about the bombing, because you
So
mentioned
first they were doing a lot of torching. So they were cherry cans, lighting the bottom, burning them out.
any black home, any black
Yes, they burned the
business.
whole city of 10,000 to the ground.
Right.
But late, it was kind of mop-up duty. Late, the morning of June 1st, there were, and the best account of it is, there were trainer planes, these biplanes that were used in World War I.
Right.
So they were just pilot training planes that were at a nearby base. Somebody commandeered them. There had to be government involvement because there was even some evidence that the National Guard had helped the Klan. They commandeered these planes. They took tar balls dipped in turpentine, lit them on fire, and just threw them on rooftops from the planes.
Today, recently, I know some folks I had conversation with from that area. They're very racist. And one happened, in 21. Now I'm talking today. Is that racial tension still, there? I mean, because they quit talking about it, didn't they? It just never happened.
It became a thing where, well, first of all, it was illegal to be taught in state schools. There was a commission, a guy named Don Boss was a state legislator who finally marshaled the resources to have a commission investigate and make a declaration, acknowledging it at least. There were still survivors at that time. In fact, one of the first female, I want to say naval officers, was one of the survivors. And there was then a little bit of a talk about it, but how this legislator found out about it was one of his teachers, who was a teenager when it happened, and stayed around in town and was a history teacher, was telling him about it, and he was laughing. He goes, "You're full of it, man. That never happened."
They never knew.
Yeah, he goes, "There's no way that could have happened, and we knew about it." And he said, "I went home and asked my grandma about it, and she goes, don't bring it up. We just..." And that was kind of the thing of how that healed.
Because there were so many murderers.
Yes.
The average guy was a killer.
Yes. So both sides just decided, hey.
Is this like a new woke thing? We're not going to talk about what happened? I mean,
Right.
my gosh.
Well, anybody watching us is finding out what happens now, but Dennis did a tremendous amount of research on this, and what he's been relaying is the facts of the situation. But this is a nonfiction book, Burn, Black Wall Street Burn, which is now available as an audio book on Audible. And I think you have a copy.
Yeah.
I know I have a copy. It's not a nonfiction book. Why did you take the approach, and what is the approach you took?
So what I called it, because there were two very good nonfiction books already on it.
Right.
There was one called The Burning. The other one was called Holocaust in the Homeland. And what I wanted to do is reach an audience that maybe wouldn't listen to nonfiction. So what I call is dramatized history, meaning there's nothing that is factually incorrect or in any way blown up. What I had to do, though, obviously, was...
I mean, you made up people. Is that
I had to imagine conversations that I couldn't have known. Now, I've read memoirs. I read people's biographies. I've read people's diaries. So I had a sense of all the major characters' voice and who they were and what they believed in. So I felt I could do that accurately. And then I had to have some composite characters on the white side because nobody was brought to justice.
But why? Okay, you're an author. You can write about anything. Why this?
I became obsessed with it because
Why?
Because I couldn't believe I didn't know about it when I first learned about it. So I didn't learn about it until like 2015.
What is this? Does it say anything about our country or where we are or where we need to go? Or
I think what it says, and I did an interview on a show that was in a black market with all black hosts, and they asked the same question, and they said, did you not want to touch it? I said, look, I don't feel any more, responsibility for this than you should feel a victim of it. Like none of us participated in anything that happened. It's a historical event, and unless we're able to be honest and talk about things that really happened, we can't possibly move forward. We've clearly never healed from that. I mean, if you look, you're Hispanic. If you look at black people who come from Haiti and different places, there is not the same rift that there exists between the African American community and the white community. That has.
My good friend Gatsa Anyahu, he's an attorney. I was in law school with him from Nigeria, and he goes, "I don't relate with American blacks." that we don't have the same shared experience.
Correct.
I don't relate. I always believe that if you're an alcoholic, to stop your alcoholism, you have to admit you're an alcoholic or a drug addict. If you're a racist or we have a racist past, we ought to admit what we are, study the history, and then we can heal and work on the project or the problem. And I feel like we're not doing that. The current political mindset, particularly of DeSantis and others like that, is to ignore it like it never happened. I always
Here
thought
on
we need to
CJ
do that,
Knows
don't you agree?
show, you can talk about it. Just don't talk about it in a Florida public school. But we're talking about Burn, Black Wall Street Burn. That's the book by Dennis Mitch Maley. You can go to Amazon.com or your favorite bookstore. You can get the hard, not the hardcover, but the hard copy, non-audible
I'm
copy.
on it.
You have an audiobook available at audible.com, and you actually narrate that. So you can search Burn Black Wall Street Burn at audible.com or your name. You got 4
I'm
other
making
books.
all my kids and my wife listen to it. So as we drive around, it's happening.
I wanted CJ to have a chance, but we ran out of time to talk about. You explained to me how someone growing up where you were in Western Pennsylvania, it goes back to this discussion of racism and how people see other groups of people. Why they are open to listening to people that we in a different part of the country, in a more diverse part, might say, wow, that sounds really racist or exclusionary or something like that. I don't know if you remember telling me about that point of view before.
So the question is, how does this happen? How do people?
How you were growing up, what you saw as far as diversity, and why for other people you didn't come out that way. You had other experiences, but for people that were there where you came from.
Yeah, so I grew up in Eastern Pennsylvania, Appalachia. In fact, the Appalachian Trail literally ran right through our town, and it was lily white when I grew up. Poor lily white, coal mining region, economic, desperation all around. All the coal was gone. There were no good factory jobs coming in to replace it. Kids were working in warehouses for what their parents made 20 and 30 years prior, not adjusted for inflation. So there was not a lot of hope there. And it was weird because, and I grew up in a what I would say a rare liberal home. But it was even interesting to me because there was so much racism even without black people being anywhere. It was still so deeply ingrained in the culture that most of the people around us, I heard the N-word thrown around constantly when I was a kid, just casually anywhere. You'd be in a bar, you could probably be in a church and get away with it. Our house was one of the few places where that would get you beaten. But that was the exception to the rule. But the interesting thing to me was that when you're in a more integrated, then there seems to be, those tensions seem to be still there. So when I moved to the South, I realized more, oh wow, I was a little ignorant as a Northerner, thinking, oh, my kid will be part of the first post-racial generation in America. And then it was like, oh no, they're just saying it behind closed doors now. And these feelings, on both sides, these feelings and these rifts still exist. And I gotta be honest with you, I don't know that we'll ever get past it. I hoped that all that work would at least give one little tiny thing into the canon.
Well,
to make
the only
think.
solution I have is that each of us must have a kid with somebody with a different race.
I
make one
agree.
race. And it's starting to happen in a way. I mean, so, like I'm Italian and this and that
Right.
and that. I'm 6% black. I mean, you may not realize that, but I think it's funny, huh? But no, I think it sounds crazy, but we're such a mixed nation.
Mm-hmm.
And
The 6% isn't your wardrobe you're talking about.
Yeah, well, no comment. Wear my tie next time, bow tie. No, but the reality is that you are correct, and it's so frustrating. I always thought that I was born in the right time, and now I feel like I was born too soon. Or is it never going to change? I
don't have a lot of.
It's got to be
hope
better
for
than it
changing,
was.
Because it certainly is, and that's one of those things that I always remind people is that when people say, "Oh, it's just the same," it's like, listen, just go back to what I just said, to the fact that that kind of language was socially acceptable, and you can say, well, the thoughts are whatever. That's changed.
About
that's
this,
positive.
Barack Obama. I mean, the fact that we've had a African American president.
Sure.
It's
who would have thought that? I wouldn't have thought that in 2000.
No.
I was wondering.
I just thought it had changed.
I was wondering in 2000 if I would ever see one in my lifetime. So that's all those things are progress. But what I would suggest is that what we got to be wary about is there are a lot of forces on both sides that are trying very hard to keep that alive. Because as long as
they gain from it.
Yes, absolutely. There are forces on the far left who absolutely are driving that division. I would say there's more on the left now than the right. I wouldn't say there's more racism, but I would say there's more, and some of it is well-intended. They think they're saving the world, but I think there's more being done on the far left to sow division between blacks and whites than there is anywhere else.
I'm a centrist, and I think there's some good stuff on the left and there's some good stuff on the right. We have to come, and then today I was talking with somebody where I only got into that Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill thing. If you've heard, they would go to war, but then have a beer after.
Yeah.
Right? We need to get back to that.
Sure.
I just think that we're on the same team, and we've got to make this happen. And the only way it's going to change, Mitch, is people like you do what you do. You're very knowledgeable. You're out there, writing away. You're writing books, and you're in the Bradenton Times putting some good stuff out there. And right now, it's hard to find journalism. I tried to be a journalist, and I realized I was too biased. But good journalism that is going to really, get the facts out, so that we can make our own decisions. Thank you very much for being here.
My pleasure.
Big fan.
Thank you.